Most people think medieval battles were a wild mess. They imagine a bunch of guys just charging at each other. Everyone fights for himself. It looks like a huge brawl, dirty and bloody. This idea comes from movies and stories. They show knights everywhere swinging swords, no real plan. There is a lot of noise and chaos. Smoke fills the air. It seems like nobody knows what is going on. This image sticks in our heads. It feels real, but this picture is not quite right. The truth is more complicated. Medieval warfare was brutal. It was loud and confusing. People died horribly, but it was not just a free-for-all. Armies tried hard to keep some order, commanders made plans, soldiers trained, they had a structure. They did not just run at the enemy like madmen. There was a method to the madness. Or at least they tried to have one. The idea that medieval battles were purely chaotic is a myth. It makes the people of that time seem less smart. It makes their armies seem less skilled. They were fighting with the tools and knowledge they had. They worked hard to make their armies effective. This meant bringing some kind of order to the field. Think about any large group of people trying to do something complex. If everyone acts on their own, nothing gets done. It becomes a mess. An army is no different. If every soldier fought independently, the army would lose. It would break apart fast. So, from the very start, medieval armies tried to prevent this. They worked on making their soldiers fight as a group. This was vital for survival. It was vital for winning. The goal was to control the fight as much as possible. Even when everything went wrong, that goal remained. The common image misses this point. It ignores the efforts made to bring discipline. It ignores the planning. It ignores the command structure. It just sees the end result, which often was chaotic, but the chaos was usually a breakdown of order, not the starting point. This idea of pure chaos also comes from how hard it is to know exactly what happened. Your records from that time can be vague. They do not always give us full details. Sometimes they are written long after the event. They might focus on the important people, like kings or nobles. They might not explain what the regular soldier did. This makes it hard for us today to piece together the full picture, so we fill in the gaps with what seems reasonable. And a mass of fighting men can easily look like chaos, but we need to look closer. We need to understand the goals. We need to understand the training. We need to understand the command. Only then can we see the real story. It is a story of humans trying their best in terrible circumstances. They faced danger and confusion, but they faced it with a plan, or at least the hope of one. The popular view simplifies things too much. It takes away the skill, it takes away the effort. It makes every medieval battle seem like a bar fight on a grand scale, but armies are more than that. They are organizations, they have hierarchies, they have roles. Even with basic weapons and slow communication, they tried to make sense of battle. They tried to win it. And winning often meant holding your line, it meant staying together. It meant following orders. This needed discipline, it needed structure, it needed some kind of order. So, let's look beyond the popular image. Let's explore what medieval battles were really like. They were not just random melees, they were attempts to fight in a coordinated way, even when that coordination was stretched to its breaking point. Armies in the Middle Ages were not just random collections of men. They were built on a foundation of training and discipline. This was essential. Without it, an army would fall apart instantly on the battlefield. Think of it like this. You cannot have a football team if no one knows the rules or their position. The same applies to war, but with much higher stakes. Soldiers, whether knights or footmen, went through a learning process. It was not always formal in the modern sense. There were no boot camps for everyone. But it happened. Knights trained their whole lives. They learned to ride, they learned to use swords, lances, and shields. They learned to fight as part of a unit. They rode together in formation. They practiced charges. They understood the role of a heavy cavalry charge. This was not about individual glory first. It was about impact as a group. A single knight was strong, but a line of knights charging together was devastating. Their training ensured they could do this. They learned to keep formation. They learned to respond to commands. Foot soldiers also trained. Peasant levies might have less training, but professional soldiers, like mercenaries or long-serving retainers, trained often. They practiced with their weapons, they drilled in formations, they learned to stand shoulder to shoulder. They learned to use their shields to make a wall. This shield wall was a basic and powerful formation. It needed men to trust each other. It needed them to hold their ground. If one man broke, the whole line was at risk. So discipline was drilled into them. They learned to march together. They learned to move as one unit. They learned to hold a line. Commanders played a huge role in this. They were the ones giving orders. A lord or a general would decide the overall strategy. He would pick the ground. He would set the formations, but how did he communicate these orders in battle? It was not easy. There were no radios. It was loud. There was dust and smoke. So they used simple methods. Banners were crucial. Each unit or important noble had a banner. Soldiers looked for their banner. It told them where to go. It told them where their unit was. It was a rallying point. If the banner moved, they moved. Horns and drums also helped. They signaled basic commands. Advance, retreat, hold the line. These sounds cut through the noise. They were simple, but effective. Shouts from commanders and officers also directed men. These leaders were often mounted. They rode along the lines, they yelled instructions, they encouraged their men, they tried to keep order. This command structure was basic, but necessary. It flowed from the general down to the individual soldier. Everyone had a role. Everyone knew who they answered to. Discipline was enforced harshly. Soldiers could be punished for desertion, they could be punished for cowardice, they could be punished for looting out of turn. This made men think twice about breaking ranks. Fear of punishment kept many in line. Loyalty also played a part. Soldiers often fought for their lord, they fought for their comrades. This bond helped them stand together when things got bad. It created a sense of shared purpose. So, even though it looked chaotic, there was a constant effort to maintain order through training, command, and discipline. These were the foundations. They were what made an army, not just a mob. When armies met, they did not just crash into each other randomly, they used specific battle formations. These formations were not just pretty patterns, they had a real purpose. They were about strength, defense, and attack. The general chose the formation based on the terrain. He chose it based on his enemy's army. He chose it based on his own troops. It was a plan, even if that plan might fall apart later. One very common formation was the shield wall. This was used by many foot soldiers. Men stood close, shoulder to shoulder. Their shields overlapped. This made a solid defensive barrier. Spears and pikes poked out from the wall. It was hard to break through. This formation was slow. But it was very strong. It was good for holding ground. It was good for withstanding charges. Roman legions used similar ideas. Later medieval armies used it too. It needed great discipline to hold. If one part of the wall broke, the whole thing could collapse. So holding a shield wall was about trust and training. Another formation involved deep columns. Soldiers would be arrayed in multiple ranks. This gave the formation weight. It meant there were always more men to push forward. It also meant fresh soldiers could rotate into the front line. This helped in long, grinding battles. A deep column could also punch through an enemy line. It was an offensive formation. Archers and crossbowmen had their own positions. They were often placed in front of the main infantry lines, or they were on the flanks. Their job was to shoot volleys of arrows at the enemy. This softened up the enemy before the main charge. It caused casualties, it broke morale. After shooting, they might retreat behind the infantry, or they might join the melee with short weapons. This showed a use of different troop types together. It was not just one big block of fighters. Cavalry, especially knights, also had specific roles. They often formed on the flanks of the army. Their job was to protect the sides, or they would be used for a decisive charge. This charge could break an enemy line. It could rout fleeing troops. Sometimes they would dismount and fight as heavy infantry. This was common for English knights in some battles. Each type of soldier had a place. They had a job. The general tried to combine them effectively. A battle typically followed certain phases. First, the armies would approach each other. This was slow. Commanders made final adjustments. Then came the missile exchange. Archers shot arrows. Slingers threw stones. This was a long-range fight. It could last for a while. After that, the main infantry lines would advance. They would clash. This was the close combat. It was a brutal push and shove. Men fought hand-to-hand. Eventually, one side might break. They would run. This led to a pursuit phase. The winners chased the losers. This was often where most deaths happened. The pursuit was a deadly part of any battle. All of these phases showed a general plan. The commander tried to control these steps. He picked the ground to his advantage. He used natural obstacles to protect his flanks. He put his strongest troops where they could do the most good. He held reserves back to plug gaps. Or he used them for a decisive strike. This was not perfect. It often went wrong. But the intent was always there. The intent was to fight with a plan. It was to use formations and tactics to win. This means the battle was often a planned event, even if the actual fighting turned into a terrible struggle. Despite all the training and planning, battles were incredibly chaotic. Order was the goal, but chaos was often the reality. It was impossible to keep perfect control once the fighting started. Many things conspired against order. It was not just a lack of effort, it was the nature of war itself. First, the physical conditions were terrible. Imagine a battlefield. It was dusty and dry weather, it was muddy and rain, visibility was poor. As more men moved, dust clouds rose. Smoke from fires or burning arrows also obscured the view. The sheer noise was deafening. Thousands of men shouting, weapons clashing, horns blaring, drums beating, dying men screaming. This made it impossible to hear commands. It made it hard to see what was happening even a few yards away. This sensory overload created instant confusion. This is what historians call the fog of war. Communication broke down quickly. A general might give an order. He might send a runner. But the runner might get lost. He might be killed. The order might be misunderstood. It might arrive too late. In the middle of a swirling melee, signals from banners or horns were easily missed. A unit might not know its neighbors had retreated. It might keep fighting alone. This led to units being isolated. It led to them being overwhelmed. The speed of information was very slow. This meant commanders often reacted to old news. They could not adjust their plans fast enough. Terrain also played a role. Battlefields were rarely flat, open fields. There might be hills. There might be woods. There might be rivers or marshes. These features broke up formations. They made it hard to move as a unit. A planned formation could become ragged. A precise movement could turn into a stumble. The soldiers would get separated from their units. They would find themselves fighting in small, desperate groups. The ground itself could be treacherous. It could cause falls. It could cause injuries. This added to the general disorder. Fear and fatigue were huge factors. Fighting is exhausting. It is terrifying. Men fought for their lives. Adrenaline would surge. But then fatigue would set in. Weapons got heavy. Bodies got tired. This made men less effective. It made them more prone to panic. If a line wavered, some men might break and run. This could spread like a disease. One man running could cause others to follow. Soon, a whole unit could rout. This was often the turning point in a battle. Once men started running, it was very hard to stop them. They lost all sense of order. They just wanted to survive. Loss of key leaders also caused chaos. Each unit had its own officers. Each banner had its lord. If these leaders fell, the unit could lose its cohesion. The men might not know who to follow, they might lose heart. The sight of their lord's banner falling could shatter morale. This could lead to a rapid disintegration of that part of the army. Commanders tried to protect their leaders, but they were often in the thick of the fight. Their deaths were a major blow to order. Finally, the sheer physical reality of close combat was chaotic. It was not an elegant duel. It was a brutal struggle. Men were packed together tightly. There was little room to swing a sword effectively. It was more about pushing and shoving. It was about stabbing and hacking in tight spaces. Men were tripping over bodies. They were fighting on slippery ground. It was an individual fight for survival within a larger scrum. This kind of fighting could never be truly orderly. It was a mass of individual struggles. So while armies tried to impose order, the conditions of battle often ensured that it would break down. The chaos was an inevitable part of the fight. So were medieval battles truly chaotic? The answer is not a simple yes or no. It is a balance. It was a blend of order and disorder. It was never purely one or the other. Armies tried very hard to be orderly. They did their best with what they had. They valued discipline. They understood formations. They tried to command their troops. But the reality of combat made that order fragile. It made it prone to breaking apart. Think of it like this. A general creates a careful plan. He places his troops in strong formations. He hopes for a clean fight. But then the battle starts. Arrows fly, men shout, dust rises. The ground is uneven. An enemy charge hits harder than expected. A key leader falls. The communication fails. Fear takes over some men. All these things erode the order. They turn the planned movement into a desperate struggle. The initial order gives way to pockets of intense, localized chaos. The degree of chaos also changed. It was not always the same. Some battles were better organized than others. A small, well-trained army might hold its order longer. A large, mixed army with many untrained levies might descend into chaos faster. A disciplined force, like the English longbowmen at Crecy, could maintain a devastating volley and hold ground. But even they fought a brutal close-quarters battle if the enemy reached them. The time period also mattered. Early medieval armies might have been less formal in their structures. Later ones, with more professional soldiers, might have been better organized. The goal was always to control the fight. Even when the field was a mess, commanders tried to influence it. They committed reserves, they tried to rally fleeing men, they looked for weak points in the enemy line. They were constantly reacting to the chaos, trying to reestablish some control. This shows an ongoing effort to fight strategically, even when the situation was dire. It was not just letting things happen, it was a continuous struggle against disorder. Understanding this blend gives us a more accurate picture of medieval warfare. It shows the challenges faced by both commanders and common soldiers. It was incredibly difficult to lead an army. It was even harder to fight in one. Soldiers needed courage, but they also needed training and discipline. They needed to trust their leaders. They needed to trust the men next to them. This allowed them to stand firm when everything else was falling apart. So, medieval battles were not a simple, unthinking brawl. They were complex events. They had a structure, they had a plan, but they also had a powerful element of unpredictability and chaos. The noise, the confusion, the fear, the physical struggle all worked against order. But the men and their leaders fought against that chaos. They tried to impose their will. They tried to maintain their lines, they tried to follow their orders. Sometimes they succeeded, at least for a while. Sometimes they failed spectacularly. But the attempted order was always there. It was a desperate, often bloody, but always present effort to control the uncontrollable.